Welcome, merry listeners, to the Breaking Script podcast with Lala and Nini.
This is where we unwrap the enchanting world of Hallmark movies and the occasional Asian dramas.
As we dive into these cinematic journeys, we're not just recapping, we're embarking on a therapeutic adventure.
Think of it as our cinematic self-care session.
And no, we're not just casual spectators. We're here to dissect the undercurrent messages, unravel the complexities, and even spot those not-so-magical moments of unhealthy behaviors.
And through it all, we'll be infusing our own unique perspectives and life experiences along the way.
Get ready to snuggle up as we explore the cheer, the charm, and the occasional cheesy wonder of these festive films. Welcome back to the Breaking Script podcast with Lala and Nini. I'm Lala.
And I'm Nini. And if you are new here, we are sister-in-laws that are turning our Hallmark movie watching, and in this case, for the next several weeks, our The Way Home watching time into self-care. We're here to break down the healthy and unhealthy relationships and healthy and unhealthy behaviors and coping mechanisms. And I think because it's so trending, probably one of the things that people love the most is that we will point out, if necessary, when there's narcissistic behavior and covert narcissistic behavior, especially because who would have thought in Hallmark movies, would you have thought, Lala, in Hallmark movies,
Definitely
that we
not.
would have pointed out as much narcissistic behavior as we have, like, from day one?
I know. Literally,
Episode
actually,
one.
day one.
I know, literally we were both shocked. We had no idea, but people love it because we call it the Omo Nardar that comes out in one of our 4 segments. But anyways, for the next few weeks, we are all about The Way Home. Because, tell us, Lala, when does season 2 start?
Season 2 is starting next week. Is that January 21st?
It sure is.
I am so excited. Literally, I have a new excitement watching this last episode because that missing piece that we're going to start, well, it's not missing. The piece that we started with, episode 1, we come back to episode 10, and that's where we're going to start for season 2, and I cannot wait.
So I needed to know that Sunday was coming. I need to know that season 2, episode 1 was coming in order to get through the reviewing of this episode 10. It has been, I know we talked about on the last podcast that Nini has just been in this period of grief. There's just been an immense amount of grief in our community, even in our own family. My mom's memorial was this last week. I'm divorced and I had a wedding anniversary, and I've only been divorced like a couple years. And so it does, like, even if you think consciously like, oh, it's going to be fine, it's really interesting because your body knows.
It's so true. Your body, what did they say? Your body keeps the score.
If you haven't read that book, by the way, we'll link it.
Yeah, it's so true.
Where you're like, what's wrong with me today? Why am I not like as productive, or I'm a little foggy? It's grief. It's grief. So anyway, all that to say, these podcast episodes are here to help widen your windows of tolerance. If you're not familiar with that, Google it. I love that polyvagal theory is becoming so much more common. And so hopefully when you're listening to our summary is usually how we start off before our review of the episode. Hopefully it's like a spa audio that just opens your windows of tolerance. And then the way that we break down, we're hoping that it's like just the perfect blend of like neuroscience, but humor and intrigue enough to continue to open your windows of tolerance. So without further ado, should we just dive into it?
Let's do it.
This is the part of our episode where you grab your preferred cup of cheer, and hopefully we're widening your windows of tolerance with a lovely audio spa summary. Where Kat and Alice attend Colton's funeral, Del goes to a grief group and makes peace with her memory of Colton. Kat has a new theory about Jacob, all in episode 10 of Not All Who Wander Are Lost. Completely distraught, Kat and Alice arrive back to the present at the pond. Kat believes it was her fault that her father crashed. Elliot and Alice console Kat. At Elliot's house, he tells Kat not to carry the weight of fault for the accident. She reminisces about the fact that Colton recognized her in the end and that he loved her. She regrets dragging Alice into the past. At the Landry farm, Alice approaches Kat to let her know that it was not her fault. Alice believes it was her own fault and that Kat chose her over Colton. Kat reassures Alice that she wasn't responsible either and they must trust in what Elliot has been saying. They cannot change the past. Brady arrives and delivers Kat divorce papers, which marks the end of their marriage. Brady tells Kat that he'll be staying at a hotel for the rest of his visit. In her room, Alice reviews the Landry Almanac, determined to return to the past to attend Colton's funeral to support Teen Kat. She invites Kat, her mom, to go with her. At the pond, they hold hands before jumping in. In 2000, Teen Elliot is in tears in the clubhouse that Colton built. Alice meets Teen Elliot in there and he reminisces on building it with Colton. Alice asks Teen Elliot to get her clothes and he feels overwhelmed by her demands, but he says he will do them for Teen Kat. Adult Kat and Alice arrive at Colton's funeral and Alice walks up to stand with the family while adult Kat stays back out of sight. After Del's eulogy, she spots adult Kat in tears hiding in the trees. In 2023, Elliot and Brady meet at the Point Cafe. Brady tells Elliot that he knows he has feelings for Kat and lets him in on the finalizing of their divorce. He admits that he was threatened by Elliot in the past because of his intelligence and close relationship with Kat. In the Landry kitchen, Del noticed Kat in deep thought. Kat tells Del that she's been thinking about Colton and assures Del that she shouldn't hang on to the idea that Colton was cheating. But Del tells Kat that she remembers a strange woman weeping at his funeral. Kat tells her it wasn't anyone of importance and excuses herself. Del goes to the kitchen drawer and pulls out the grief support group card that Kat gave her. In her room, Alice hears Colton's voice encouraging her to embrace her singing talent. At the Point, she asks Spencer about performing at the opening of the Roxy. Spencer is excited to hear that she's up for it. Kat enters Elliot's home. She tells him that she is the reason her mom thinks her father was cheating. She regrets time travel and considers herself the bad seed. Elliot tells her once again to let the past go. He is exhausted by the fact that his life has been ruled by the past. Kat promises she will let it go to focus on them, and she tells him that she is grateful for him, and they share a kiss. In the Landry kitchen, Brady tells Kat that Alice has signed up to perform at the Roxy. Kat and Brady are both proud of her, and Brady wants to chat with Alice about the divorce, but Alice says she's fine and doesn't need to have a talk. Kat tries to comfort Alice in her room, but Alice says she wants to check on Teen Kat. Kat tells her that Alice never went back to Port Haven after the funeral. Alice wants to know why her mom didn't tell her sooner. She wanted to say goodbye to Teen Kat because she is her best friend, and she storms off. Alice heads to the pond, but when she emerges, she has not arrived in the year 2000. Instead, she's only gone back months, sometime before she and Kat arrived in Port Haven in 2023. She sneaks into the Landry house and spies Del talking to Rita. Rita's trying to convince Del to send the letter that she wrote to her daughter and granddaughter. She tells Rita she's not going to do that, and Rita encourages her because she needs her family around. But Del refuses and tosses the letter. After they walk out, Alice walks in and retrieves the letter from the trash. Alice returns to present day and meets Kat in the Landry kitchen just after she has signed the divorce papers. Alice tells her mother she was right. The pond didn't take me where I wanted to go, but it took me where I needed to go, she explains. Brady interrupts him to say that he'll be at Alice's concert and that he loves them both. Inside the Landry barn, Alice is practicing with her guitar. That's when Del appears and tells Alice her singing was beautiful. Alice admits that she's scared to perform, but Del encourages her to do the thing that scares you. She wishes that Colton was around to hear his granddaughter sing. At the Roxy, Kat approaches Elliot. She's nervous about Alice's performance, asking to hold his hand through it. They take their seats and await Alice's performance. Alice takes the stage to loud applause. She begins to play until she glances over and sees her parents sitting together. She stops the song and tells the crowd she wants to play a different song, one that has gotten her through a lot. Del recognizes the song as the one Colton wrote for her, and Del applauds in tears, confused as to how Alice knows the song. At Elliot's house, Kat tells Elliot she signed her divorce papers. She uses the opportunity to tell Elliot how much he means to her. He tearfully tells Kat that she's always been special to him. But wait for it. He wants to start a new chapter, to see where his own path might lead, and he hopes that she will understand. She doesn't, but Elliot tells her he needs her to try. Although shaken by his decision, she agrees. In the laundry kitchen, Del asks Alice where she learned the song she performed. She tells her that Kat sang it to her when she was little and she always remembered it. Del tells them she went to the grief support group. Although the people were nice, it wasn't for her. Del apologizes to Kat for not being there for her as she was lost in grief. She tells them that Alice and Kat have been her support group. Since they've come back to her life, they have filled her heart. Kat says she's grateful that Del sent the letter, but Del says she didn't. Alice smiles, knowing who was the one who sent the letter after all that time, finding it in the trash all those months ago. The Landry dog. Finn walks in with a torn up baseball that he got from the pond. Del tells them Finn can't stay out of the pond, and Kat recognizes the baseball as the same one that Jacob had. Could Finn have time traveled in the pond as well? Kat runs to grab the Landry almanac in the living room, where she finds a message next to a torn out page and Jacob's hand-drawn initials. The explorer found a home, but he still looks to the stars when he feels lost. She has a flashback of Teen Kat and Jacob lying together, staring up at the star-strewn ceiling of his room. Young Jacob says, "Did you know explorers use the stars to lead them home when they got lost?" Kat stares at the words in disbelief. Kat has a flashback of when she walked Jacob home the night he disappeared. When he reaches the front door, he hears a dog bark. It's Finn. He chases the dog through the fields to the pond and jumps in after him. Alice interrupts Kat. She tells Alice Jacob followed Finn into the pond the night she saved him. Del joins their conversation and wonders what they're discussing. Kat tells her she knows what happened to Jacob. Meanwhile, in 1814, a woman in white races through the forest with pursuers chasing her. The woman arrives at the pond. It is Kat, her short hair grown out, and wearing a long white gown. Before she jumps into the water, she says, "I'll be back for you, Jacob. I promise." And that is a wrap on The Way Home, Season 1.
And now is a part of our episode where we rate this episode. And it is out of 10 bobas. We're just giving it an overall rating. And I'll let you go first, Nini. What do you give this episode?
It's episode 10, so I feel like it's only appropriate to say 10 out of 10. I mean,
Or
it
100
doesn't
out of
very
10?
much here. Yeah, 100 out. Well, last week was 100 out of 10 because of how much
Unfolded.
just the brilliant writing and how much was
Yeah.
packed into each moment. This one, like, it definitely slowed down a lot. And I feel like there's
True.
still a trigger warning with this episode. Last week was like major trigger warning, like trigger warnings galore.
Yes.
This week it wasn't as intense, but it's still there for sure. Like, I still, where I am in my grief process, I needed to watch something light and fluffy afterwards, even more so. So that's why it's a 10 out of 10 instead of 100 out of 10. That only applies to The Way Home. You're not going to hear that for anything else.
I know.
Probably
I
on
agree.
Our podcast.
It was amazing. I think that it wrapped up a lot of dangling threads.
Totally.
But also left you with that cliffhanger at the end. Like, we find out what happens to Colton. We know somewhat what happens to Jacob. Like, a lot of the things that this whole storyline is based on wraps up. Kat and Brady get a divorce. Like, they finalize their divorce.
Yeah,
there's a lot of completion in this. So it was honestly a great episode.
It gives you enough completion to have the feels while leaving you, like, obviously there's so many more questions. So let's start with our first of 4 segments. This is how we break script with The Way Home. We start off with Home Sweet Home, which is the glimmers and what we love and breaking down the romantic and family relationships. What you said with your ratings what I love the most is how much everything is brought full circle. Like, I'm
Yes.
all about the full circle thing. Like the full circle moments, full circle that Alice is going to be playing guitar in the last episode, and that's how we started in the first episode, is a performance. And this time Kat is sitting in between Brady and Elle. Like, there's just like the full circle moments, but then the cliffhanger that it leaves you on. Like, I just think is so brilliant. But
It
you look
is.
like you're about to say something. Go ahead, dive in.
No, there was just so much to love about this episode, and you're right at the it was paced a lot slower. Um, but one of my absolute favorite moments that just sometimes I don't know if you get this, and I've probably said this before, is that when I'm like overcome with emotion, I almost feel like I can't breathe. And it happened in this episode where I'm literally like gasping for air. It was when Alice sings Colton's song at the Roxy opening and
Yeah.
Belle's face, and it you can just feel almost like this feeling that she hasn't had in
Yeah.
however many years, 20 years or however long that
Yeah.
they've been gone. What is it, 10 years? I don't know. Anyways,
Yeah.
it was just oh, like my heart, I felt like I couldn't get enough air. Like I felt that grief, but that joy. This show really gives you all the emotion. And then I also loved, it's a very like small point, but the band that was playing before Alice went up, they were singing a song called The Way Home.
The Way Home song. It is the Way Home song that they
Yeah.
wrote for the show.
And I was
Yes.
like, "Oh, that's so
I
sweet."
love it so much. There's just so many sweet moments like that, like
It really was.
all the
Yeah.
way throughout, right? And so, which we didn't discuss too much in detail because we didn't want to give away too much. But in episode 9, we began to discuss the fact that Colton recognized Kat, and
Yes.
he was able to say he knew that that was his daughter. And he says, "I love you, Catherine." Like, but then in episode 10, we start off with Kat reflecting, and it's such the perfect picture, that scene where she's sitting with Elle. It's their first debriefing time, right? Like, Alice is clearly exhausted from that trauma and grief that
Yeah.
they just witnessed Colton pass. Like, and we're going to talk more about that in Surprising Detours and the way we see it. But they just went through trauma,
Yeah.
and Alice is passed out from the grief and exhaustion. And Elle and Kat are having an adult conversation, and she's telling Elle for the first time, he looked me in the eyes and told me that he loved me.
Yeah.
Like, for anyone who has ever lost a loved one and like you
Mhm.
just want to hear them one more time, like, I cannot imagine, like, I'll get choked up, like how that must feel, of like, that's
Yeah.
what I just need to hear him one more
More
time,
time.
especially when it's so different. And I have experienced this, like a loved one where it's an accident and you weren't there and you don't know exactly what
Mm.
happened, and there's all those questions and there's no closure. So I've had
Yeah.
one where it's like, we knew what was coming, it was wrapped up really well, it was the most beautiful ending, and then the ones where it's really traumatic and you don't have
Yeah.
answers, where you're longing for that so much more. I mean, for her to acknowledge and to be able to tell Elle that, and um receive that, and it's that perfect picture what we've been talking about, I think the last couple of episodes
Yeah.
actually, of that being able to have joy and sorrow in the
In
same
the
cup.
same. Yeah.
In that one conversation, she's able to receive from that glimmer of like, he knew who I was and he told me he loved me. He looked me in the eyes, is literally what she said.
Mm.
But in that time of immense grief where it's like, oh my gosh, it's the same conversation where she's saying, we caused the accident. Like, why have we
Mm.
been doing this? So, but beyond that, so the next scene is, where um Kat and Alice are kind of consoling one another,
Yeah.
each one thinking that the accident was their fault. And Kat telling Alice that she would always choose her.
I
Like,
know. Ugh.
ugh. there's so much trauma and so much grief and still so many questions, but the way that they were able to convey in this episode of how much healing has occurred
Yes.
in all of the relationships, obviously, of course, the 3 generations of
Mhm.
Landry women, right?
Yep.
Dell, Kat, and Alice is probably the most precious, but I think that is my favorite. Like,
It was such a
seeing,
beautiful moment.
yeah, and seeing
And
Alice mature, but keep
yeah.
going.
Well, I was gonna say Kat also says this line, which I feel happy about because I think one way they could have taken this was that Kat would live with this never-ending sense of guilt that
Yeah,
she caused it. But she said to Alice, like, Elliot has always told us, like, we can't
yeah,
change the past. So no matter what they would
yes,
have done, the outcome would
yes,
have still been the same. And she said, we can have faith in that. And I was like, that's a really nice way to not have Kat spend the rest of this series
totally. Yes,
feeling guilty because we know Colton was always going to die. I appreciated that because someone that deals with
yes,
a lot of guilt, I
yes,
even secondhand guilt. Even I'm a feeler. I'm an HSP. I'm a highly sensitive person. If you
yes.
don't know what that is, it doesn't mean like sensitivity in the way of like you can, I'll cry. Well, I will cry on a dime, but it's not sensitive in what we would call, just use it as a general term. So
Yeah,
when I watch things, I tend to like feel them very deeply. So that was something
yeah,
when I watched this originally, like I feel the guilt as if it was me. And so the fact that
yeah.
she had that moment was almost like a release, even for me to be like, hey, we don't have to feel guilty about this. Move on. I really appreciated that. I love when that happens in shows and
I love it. It's funny because I'm also an HSP, but I didn't realize it until probably the last few years of my life. And it's interesting how HSPs can manifest and be so different. Like we all fall
mhm,
under that umbrella, but
mhm.
I don't feel movies like you
Oh, I
do.
yeah, I actually as well only it was probably the first therapy session I ever had. Immediately, she was like, "You're an HSP." And I
I
was
didn't
like,
know that.
"Wow." And everything made so much sense. But yeah, I'm very sensitive to things that I
Yeah.
watch, and I tend to like, in general, care about things more than people that
Yes.
it's affecting,
Yes.
care about.
Yes. It's like, but
Um,
it makes life so much harder because you
it
feel
really
things so
does.
much more intensely, right?
So much
Yeah.
more.
But it's also a superpower. So I'll link a
True.
book about HSPs if you guys are interested. And it's also interesting being an HSP parent to HSP children.
Ooh.
Oh man, that is a whole other game. So helpful when you finally have that revelation aha moment, like, oh, this makes so much sense. But anyways, we digress.
Mm.
But yes, this
Okay, I have one last thing that
go
I
ahead.
loved. I
Go ahead.
loved, well, two things actually, and then I'm done. Um,
Okay.
I loved that we learned a little bit more about Elliot's past and that his dad was a fisherman, and that's
Yes.
why he was always at the Landry's house. Because that to me was still a mystery, which
Totally.
prediction, jumping ahead, might unfold later. That's what I'm hoping. Second was I
Yes.
love that Kat and Alice went to the funeral together.
Yeah. That Alice asked her mom, "Will you go with me?" Like
Yes,
she wanted to be there for her friend, but she also wanted, like, was able
her mom.
to,
Mhm.
the fact that she's able to communicate her need to her mom, like, I
Yeah.
need you, is huge. Because that's the whole teenage angst, right? I need you, but I don't want to need you.
Yeah.
And so I don't communicate it. I just love, there was so much healthy, like you were saying about a cat, like being able to resolve and receive, like immediately absorb, like, oh, this would have always happened. So we have to have faith in that and not be guilty. But also when Alice's parents wanted to sit down and talk to her about the divorce, and like immediately she was able to tell her parents, like, this is for the better and not out of anger. Like this girl, surely there's grief there that she's holding down, but she's also still freshly grieving this trauma. Like, I thought that was a really mature response. Like,
I
when does
think
that
that
happen in real life?
well, I think that she was able to have she has the privilege of having more context into their
Exactly.
relationship and seeing at a young age that even then it really wasn't a good fit, and that honestly,
Ugh.
Kat was probably drawn to Brady because he was there during the trauma of Jacob and her father. Like it was definitely a trauma
Yeah.
bond. And I think Alice, which again, like most children of divorce don't have the context. So I think this is a
Yeah.
unique experience, but it does really show how much she has matured through this whole process.
100%. And I love that you brought up like, oh, this, I think there's something to be learned from that is that, sometimes as parents, we don't know when to tell our children certain things. Like I remember as my children were growing up, it's like, oh, it's not like you mean to keep stories from them, but you have to have set aside intentional as they're getting older and they have more understanding to tell them about where you've come from and
Hmm.
how you've become the person you are because it's life experiences that shaped us. Um, so that's something I've had to like think about. Like my mom, I think when I was in fourth grade, started to set aside like Friday nights. I didn't have a time I had to go to bed. Like we would talk for like hours,
Mm.
hours and hours. I think with my brother, she didn't have a set time. I think it was just all the time. Um,
So true.
we'll talk about that another time. But so I had to be intentional. Like I think it was when my first turned 12, I started this tradition, which I haven't because of COVID and all other factors, many other factors. I've had to learn it doesn't have to be a certain way, doesn't have to look a certain way, but just as long as I'm intentional, I set aside time. But I started doing like a mommy son, mommy daughter when they turn 12, like we do a trip.
Hmm.
That's just the two of us, and it's to tell them like about their roots and where they came from and some stories that they've never heard before, but it opens up conversation. Like this isn't just like for this trip, it's like to continue where you have questions, ask me anything. So anyway, um so yeah, I love how much this episode like showed of how much healing has been in the relationships, and I'm going to end with the segment with this last one, that Dell actually went to the grief support group that Colton went to.
Oh,
First of all, the fact that it's
yes.
still at that house, I feel like is pretty amazing. Um, but that she went, that she was
I
willing to
know.
go, I feel
I
like is
know.
huge. She gave it a try. And that she was able to tell her daughter, it's not for me, which
Hmm.
listen, sister, I get it.
Yeah,
I preferred the
exactly.
one-on-one grief support to a grief group for
Hmm.
at least a few years. Um, but then this made me cry. I was like weeping
Mm.
when she was able to tell Kat she realized she wasn't there for her because her own grief was
Yes.
so immense. And she really regrets that. Like, listen, as a single mom, like this is what where I have to be careful not to get stuck here. There's that
Mm.
meme that says like, or it's not just a meme, but like a quote, a meaningful quote that goes around like, you have to forgive yourself for the choices you made or things that happened when you were in survival mode. And
Mm.
I'm like, what if I'm still in survival mode when I'm reading this? Like,
Yeah.
I'm still in survival mode. Like, I know that there's things that I'm missing and things that I need to like be saving for my children's therapy that's
Mm.
happening in real time from me right now. But anyways, that was just so meaningful that she was able to communicate that. I thought that was so
I
beautiful. It was
know.
a huge glimmer.
I know. I loved that.
Favorite. So anyways, let's move on because we do have quite a lot to cover in surprising detours and the way we see it as our last segment. But um surprising detours is where we talk about just things that surprised us. This episode, usually in our regular Hallmark movies, this is where we talk about unhealthy
Mm.
behaviors or coping mechanisms, and usually where the Omo Nardar comes out. Can we just start with that? We haven't, because we all know Brady is the narcissist
Mhm.
um in this whole series. Um and I have this in dead ends, like I almost forgot about Brady
Same,
because
actually,
the last
and then when
couple
he appe
episodes were so
he's
intense.
And he was gone? I know.
Yes. Let's go back and just talk about what we missed from episode 9 that we didn't cover enough. Lala texted me afterwards. She's like, we forgot to talk about how Alice is the cause of the accident.
Yes, that was so the surprise is we really figure out, or we finally find out how Colton dies. And Alice is in the road. Kat saves her, but it ends up throwing her dad's truck off the road and he hits the pole, and then we have that very heart-wrenching scene of Kat holding her dad and her dad saying, I love you. So we kind of skimmed over that a giant piece of information on our last episode.
Yes.
So that was to me, a huge surprise because Colton's death was always probably the biggest mystery to me.
Totally.
Well, aside from Jacob's disappearance. But can I rapid fire some of my surprises?
Please go for it.
Okay. So 1, finally found out how Colton actually died. 2, Elliot breaking up with Kat. 3,
I cannot.
Alice is the one who sends the letter that Dell's letter that started this whole thing of them moving to Port Haven.
Uh-huh.
We find out that this is the last visit. The funeral is the last visit Kat ever has, or sorry, Alice ever has in the 90s, which I was mourning. I was like, oh my gosh, that is crazy. Yeah. And then before we end, I want to read actually, and I know we have it in the summary. We've already read it, but I want to read it again because I think it summarizes the biggest missing piece of this episode. So, do you mind if I quickly read it now?
Please, go for it.
Okay. So, it's at the end of the recap, and I know you guys have already heard it, but I'm just going to read it again because I think this is the biggest, missing piece. So, the Landry dog, actually, sorry, I'm going to start where, okay. Kat runs to grab the Landry almanac in the living room where she finds a message next to a torn out page of Jacob's hand-drawn initials. The explorer found a home, but he still looks to the stars when he feels lost. And then she has a flashback of teen Kat and Jacob lying together staring at the star-strewn ceiling of the room. And Jacob says, did you know the explorers used to use the stars to lead them home? Blah, blah, blah. Kat has a flashback of when Jacob walked home the night he disappeared. And when he reaches the door, he hears a dog bark. It's Finn. He chases the dog through the fields to the pond and jumps in after him. Oh my gosh. And then we find out that the woman in 1814 is Kat. I mean, all of these. Kat. I am like, okay, 1, we know what happens to Jacob. 2, and she literally says, I'll be back for you, Jacob. I promise. Like, oh my gosh. All of these surprises. Like, they did such a great job. I didn't see this coming.
No, I didn't. Well, I for sure didn't see that Kat was going to be the witch. For some reason, the entire time, I thought it was either going to be Dell or Alice. Right? Which okay, we can't get ahead of ourselves. That's the way we see it. Let me just say, though, I have to say this. And maybe this is the way we see it. No, it's not. This is a debate because it actually did happen. So it's not a theory.
Okay.
When you were like, Alice is the cause of the accident. Well, technically Kat is.
You're right.
Because she's the one to choose to go back first.
You're right.
That's just so much, right? That's where they had to like let each other go from that. But not only that, the fact that let's talk about the breakup here real quick.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this episode, more than anything, you're seeing the pressure that's been on Elliot.
Yes.
You're seeing it when Alice goes back for the funeral and Elliot's like, you are asking too much of me. Like, do you understand how much you're asking of me? And you're like, oh, this is immense pressure, like his entire life. So when he finally tells Kat, and, usually in this this segment, we're talking about unhealthy behaviors or coping mechanisms. I guess what I'm trying to point out here is like this kid, Elliot, starting as a teenager through his grown life, has taken responsibility for
Mm-hmm.
this that he didn't necessarily have to.
Yeah.
It wasn't he didn't have to take this on. It wasn't something that is like a healthy person would definitely take responsibility of this. So is it potentially some over responsibility? And you know, obviously he was doing it out of love for Kat because he's loved her this whole time. It was really healthy for him to get to this point where he says, I've been a spectator in my
In
own
my
life.
own
I
life.
cried when he said that. I was like,
Honestly,
how many of us do that where we're not like
yeah.
fully present and not really living? And you can get in this hamster wheel of over
Mm-hmm.
responsibility and you can't stop. And you're like, you're over functioning and living on the sidelines of your own life. That might possibly
So
run in my
true.
family. I don't know. Anyways, it does. I joke. But he says, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is my affirmations, where he's like, for the first time in my life, I can make my own choices. And I was like,
No.
yes, make your own choices. At the same time, you're breaking my heart, and I can't believe this is happening right now. But he says the words, I'm free. And that like broke me. Because that's what for me, I had my one word, this was a couple years ago, was
Mm,
freedom. I had no idea where that was leading, but it was when I was first learning more about polyvagal theory.
mm,
And the fact it's so important in recovery that you know that you have choices. In
yes.
order to have freedom, you have to have choices. So anyways, that I felt like was incredibly profound.
Yes.
Um, and let's talk about Alice's last trip. That's going to bleed over into the way we see it.
Mm,
But when she says, when am I feel like grief is such a funny thing because when she travels
mm-hmm.
and um it was so sad that Kat never got a chance to tell Alice that the funeral was her last trip of seeing teenage Kat. That
I
broke my heart.
know.
It
I
broke my
know.
heart. But that when she does, I feel that it's very interesting. It seemed like she immediately recognized that she wasn't in the 90s for that last trip. Like when
Yeah,
she got
because she
onto that
got out of
rock,
the
she's
water.
looking up,
She's like, what?
when am I?
Yes.
Instead of where am I, she says, when am I? And I was like, listen, girl, I can relate to that. Especially in grief and you've been through trauma and like it like does a weird thing to time. I
Mm,
feel like it like extends time. It feels like I tell people often like when there's been more trauma like back to back, it feels like I've lived like 10 lives within a very short period of time.
yes.
Um but how interesting that she's gotten to this place of maturity where she can watch Alice can watch Dell throw away the letter. She's listening to Dell and Rita saying, "Don't you want to meet your granddaughter?" for the first time.
I
And
know that
Dell
was mind
saying,
blowing.
right? Like she's
Hmm.
even in this point, Dell is fighting for her choice. Like, don't push me beyond my boundaries before I'm ready. And Rita's pushing
Yeah.
her. And Alice is so like mature to not be hurt by all of that and just be
You're
like,
so
let me
right.
go grab the letter and stick it in the mailbox. Like,
Mm,
wow, that is incredible. Anyway, are you done?
yeah.
Oh, wait, we didn't talk about
Oh.
Kat is the other woman.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh. Because I've been sitting on that. I've almost said that so
I,
many episodes ago.
me
Oh,
too.
finally. We know
We can
she's the
finally
other
say
woman.
it.
Yes, she is
Kat
the
is the
other
other
woman.
woman. And
I
she
know.
realizes, oh my gosh, I'm the other woman that's causing all this doubt in my mom. But let's talk about that funeral as we move on to dead ends. This is where we talk about what we didn't like. Usually this
Mm,
is the oi with the poodles already in our regular Hallmark movies where we talk about plot holes and continuity issues, but they're just the way home is done so well. We don't have a
they
whole
have.
lot there. I think
No.
our episode 9 was like the first time we really brought up, but I do have a little bit of one in this
Oh,
one.
okay. Okay.
Um, so at the funeral, at Colton's funeral, This entire town has known about Jacob's disappearance. They had to have been very involved in
I
that
know.
search for Jacob. This is a town, Dell and Colton were such a strong, loving, married couple with a healthy family. That Landry farm
A
has
pillar
been
of the
in the Landry
community.
family for generations. They are yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. They are pillars in the community. How is it that
That no
at
one
this
else is there.
funeral,
Yeah.
the only people
Our cat's friends.
are Rita and Nick's moms? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think so. Okay, it's a small one, but still, like, I'm
No, I
offended
know.
for them.
I know.
I'm offended for them. Um, and the fact that we're ending with Elle and Kat's breakup.
Oh, yeah, that's not fun. But I also felt like in that moment, something happened to him. I agree with you. I think this is healthy.
Yeah,
He wants to live his own life, but I also feel like there was a little bit of sinister energy.
100%, which we will
But
talk
going,
about.
yes, but going ends. Okay. Something that I forgot that Kat and Brady weren't divorced, actually.
Yes, this happens
So I think that
because
was kind
it
of
takes
jarring.
forever. Yeah.
And I was like, you've been dating other people.
Yes, let's
Like
talk about that. Yes.
Brady
Uh-huh.
was
That's not
living with
kosher.
Rachel. Like she moved in.
Yeah.
Um, I was just like, oh, that's rough.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of wish that they were already divorced at the
Yeah.
beginning of the episode.
Right.
Because so then you're saying that this was a separation. This doesn't feel like a separation. This feels like divorce. I don't know. I was just like, I kind of wish that you were already divorced because even at the end, Brady was like, are we making the right decision? And I'm like, isn't that a
Dude,
little
you're living
late?
with another girl. Like, but
Yeah.
to be honest, like, it's a very real representation of what a real
Mm,
divorce is like. Like, those feelings don't go away overnight. And I'm sure it's like case by case. We're not judging people here, but yeah,
no.
usually you wait till the divorce is
Final.
finalized. Probably in a lot of people's situations, they prefer and consider it healthier to have the divorce finalized before you go out to date. Now, there are exceptions because of the fact that he clearly had an affair, right?
Hmm.
Rachel was the other woman. He was clearly having an affair while he was still married. Or maybe that's unclear. That's my assumption of what
I think it's
happened.
alluded to the fact that that was probably
Right.
what
That's
happened.
what happened. Right. And so, yeah, in that situation, especially when divorces take a long time and that person is already with someone else, then yeah, I
Hmm.
see where the woman is also dating. Um, but this is where we have to talk about the Omo Nardar is coming out here. Because can we talk about Elle and Brady's conversation at the point where Brady um is telling Elle, your time has come.
I know.
I have delivered the divorce papers. You can now act on your not so hidden feelings. And Brady tells Elliot that he was threatened by him, that he knew that he was the one that
Cat always went
basically,
to.
this is my interpretation. Brady is a narcissist, and narcissists literally physiologically do not have the ability to have empathy. They're missing that in their brain. They physiologically cannot. They can fake it so well. I almost cussed there. How well they can fake it. Did you know that there's such thing, I think we've talked about this before, as intellectual empathy? So narcissists, especially sociopaths, are really good at this, and they actually have to. There's a fantastic YouTube channel. I'll try to link it below. It's about, oh my goodness, I'm gonna botch the YouTube channel, but it's about, like, it started off as this guy who was really awesome, just had this heart for special needs kids. And so he was doing YouTube videos with like kids that have different diagnoses. And
Okay.
a few of the episodes he does with adults, like, for ADHD or different things like that. And he did this one with a sociopath. And the
Oh.
sociopath was literally saying, he's in counseling and he knows he's a sociopath. And he says he literally cannot help it. It's like involuntary. Like the way that he operates is that he basically scans people for their point of weakness. And it just is
Whoa.
involuntary that he takes advantage of people's weaknesses.
Oh
He
my
has to
gosh.
intentionally not. And so oftentimes someone with a narcissistic personality disorder has that same, like I've just observed this in a lot of narcissists and sociopaths. They have this clairvoyance, it seems like, almost. And some of them, it is straight up textbook clairvoyance, where it's like they know things. How do they know these things? It seems like they're extra insightful, but
Mhm.
it's because they know how to read people, and they're reading people and they're taking their weaknesses to manipulate them with their weaknesses. They have to
Mm.
intentionally not. That's why
Mm.
they're so frustrated when they don't. And they're like, I'm making so much effort. Like, can't you see? And you're like, this is so twisted. Um, so the reason I bring this up is because Brady is saying that he's threatened by the fact that Elliot has empathy that Brady does not, that he cannot offer Kat.
Mm.
That is my translation of that conversation.
Mhm.
And not only that, but this whole conversation is Brady meddling in Elle and Kat's relationship.
I know.
This is textbook Nardar alert, because they hover, even though they have someone else and they've discarded you. If you don't know the acronym DARVO, look it up. They've already discarded you and they already have someone else, but they're going to hover so that their last victim and their last supply can't have anyone else either. And it was
Wow.
so crazy because I literally watched this. Because I'm in a coaching certification that has like narcissist abuse specialist, I
Mhm.
hear a lot of stories, and it was literally like 2 stories back to back that I saw of women who had just started dating and finally felt like they found someone that they could really be with, someone who was healthy, but their ex, who's a narcissist, got in between them and made it too difficult, so they had to break up. This is
Mm.
a very real thing. Like, it makes me wonder, even though Elle got to a healthy place and was communicating to Kat somewhat, like that was a healthy
Yeah.
decision for him,
Mhm.
at the same time, I can't help but wonder, like, did Brady's conversation do something to like
Yeah.
shift him to get him to that point? It had to have had influence
It
somehow,
I agree. I definitely think it
right?
did. Mhm.
Anyway, it breaks my heart because
I know.
after that, when Alice is singing and Kat had asked Elle, like, I need you to hold my
Hold my
hand, he
hand.
didn't respond. And I don't think he did. I didn't see him holding her hand at all after that, even during the show. Not only did they not hold hands, but then like Pat and Brady had a tender moment where like they touched hands, and I was like, ew.
I
That's the
know.
thing, ladies. With the Nardar here, I have to bring up, if I haven't brought this up before, you have to be so careful about feeling bad for the abusers. I feel like so
Mm.
many times in
That's
situations
good.
where we have victims, our society protects abusers instead of the victims first, because we feel bad. For some reason, we feel bad. And there are many coaches out there in the emotional abuse, covert abuse world that will refer to that, like people, the one with the antisocial personality disorder, taking advantage of your empathy.
Mm.
That like positive thinking and hope you have, that can be a positive thing in life. We don't want that to die in you. Can be considered a hopioid or hopium. In a situation with an abuser, you have to, that is your drug. You have to let it go. That whole like, but anybody can change. If you're the supply, it is not your responsibility. You need to walk away. Sure, let that hope be there for that person with someone else. You do not need to be
Mhm.
involved. It is not
That's
healthy for
good.
you.
Mhm.
You having that opioid or hopium in still in relationship with that abuser is, you are that abuser supply, um and they are your supply, and you need to cut the cords.
That's
It's a
good.
two-way street. You not holding that hope for them in that relationship with them is actually an act of love for
Yeah.
that like that's the ultimate love of walking away. So anyways,
Mm.
I will leave it at that. See, isn't this like, these are like really in-depth, profound, important conversations to have had that you would never expect from a Hallmark show.
Right? I know.
All right, should we move into the way we see it now?
Let's do it.
The way we see it for the way home is about theories because obviously, not like the Hallmark movies where it's like a happily ever after. We have so many more questions and theories. Do you want to start with the whole Elliot being sinister, having a sinister feeling? Did you have any more to say there? Because I sure did.
Um, okay. So this is more of like a question slash prediction for season 2. So I
Okay.
was getting sinister vibes from Elliot.
Yes.
And one thing that I'm wondering is because he feels regretful of being like a spectator in his own life and like he's been defined by the past while he's been trying to live in the future,
Yes.
will he try to go back in time? Is he going to mess with the time continuum or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm wondering if he's going to be like constantly messing with time. That's what I wonder with him.
Yeah.
And then I'm also just gonna throw this question out there because
Okay.
it's same vein. How many times has the reality happened? I know we talked
That's what
about
I'm
this,
saying. Yes,
but
that's
like
what I'm
how
saying.
many times like is that even the real Elliot or is that the bad Elliot? Like maybe
Oh
he's
my goodness.
do you know what I
Oh my
mean? Now
goodness.
I question everything.
Yes, and that's why he can't travel because the other Elliot actually did time travel.
Like
Oh my
there's
gosh.
so many ways that it could
So
go.
much. It's the
Okay, so
alternate, the multiverse one. Okay. Okay, because that's my question. What perpetuates it also is that you realize Alice had already time traveled
yes,
because
she
she already sent the letter. She was the one that sent the letter. So which came first, the chicken or the egg?
oh my gosh.
Which time travel trip was first then for her, right?
Okay, I 100%. This is like I'm swirling, I'm spiraling because I have no idea. I don't know what up is anymore. Okay, my question though. So with
Yeah.
that, what about Jacob? He's been
That's
time
what I'm
traveling.
saying.
Is the kid Jacob actually the adult Jacob that time traveled to get back home?
Okay, you know what's really funny?
What? We're confusing everyone.
Um is somebody said, what if on the this is from the Deck the Hallmark podcast. I could be
Okay.
botching this up, but one of the theories is what if Byron is Jacob?
Jacob. Oh.
And it was like so disturbing for so many episodes
Oh
because
wait,
I
but
don't know if it
he
was
had a
Dan or
relationship
it
with
wasn't Bran.
Dell.
That's why it's so disgusting. Like, ew, like
No,
why?
they
But
can't.
like, and it makes me wonder because I
But I
was the
get
one that
why
like
the
pretty early
theory.
on. It's a
Mm.
disgusting theory, but it went on. It persisted for quite a few episodes. I have to say though, like when I realized that I felt like Elle was sinister, like in the beginning, probably
Mm-hmm.
the first early episodes, I said this, right? What if Elle and Byron are like in cahoots? Because I've said in early episodes, like Byron just gives me the ew, like the ick.
Yeah.
I like what is happening. I don't know who is the villain. To me, it was like when I the first time I watched it, it was like between Dell, Elle,
Right.
and
And Byron.
Byron. But then I was like, wait, what if Jacob and Colton have been time traveling and have seen each other
That's what I'm wondering.
previously? Because it made okay, when Colton came to Dell and was like, everything's gonna make sense tomorrow, I thought that he was gonna go back in time and get Jacob, and that he was expecting that he and Jacob were
But
gonna
would
be at
come
the
back.
table
But maybe what
explaining
happens is he doesn't. Oh my
right.
gosh. Okay, so maybe Colton's also time traveling, but I have because he recognizes Kat
That's what I'm saying.
and Dell doesn't recognize Kat in the past. Like,
What if it's a different Dell? Like it's so there's so much to this. And then also if they're considering Kat the White Witch, what's Jacob in that timeline? Like, and
mm,
Kat is an adult in the 1800s. That's also confusing. Like,
mm-hmm.
are
You're
we
right.
ever going to see teenage Kat again? who is Alice as an adult? Like, are we gonna go forward? Like, there's so
There's
many
so
questions. Okay,
much.
not only that, but Finn, the dog, does not
Can
show
talk
up
to me.
very much. Okay. And
No.
this actually, I forgot to mention this in a dead ends because it's really more in the way we see it. But Dell says he can't stay out of the pond even in the winter. That doesn't make any sense because you told us that it freezes solid in the winter. Again, with this plot hole that was,
Mm,
brought up in the last episode. So like, are you saying the dog skates on the pond? Like, what are you talking about? Like,
that's hilarious.
I don't understand. And why, like, does this dog time travel on the
I
regular? Because he's been gone. We have not seen him in several episodes. Like, where has he been?
he's he
And
takes the
when has he
ball.
become their dog? Like,
Yeah, because what's his name? Jacob called him puppy.
yeah, but he wasn't a puppy then.
Do you
I mean,
know
he looked the
what?
same,
He's
but
probably from the past. The
that's what
dog.
I'm saying. Like, this is so confusing because he was just this stray dog in one of the earlier episodes showing up at one of the family picnic dinners. Anyway, also, what does that quote mean to you? Like when right before Kat was like, I know what happened to Jacob. I wrote down the quote because she was looking in the family heirloom, right?
Right.
That has all the births and deaths written down. And the quote that she found that's like hidden in the margin is, I think she's thinking that Jacob, who was very young and hadn't learned cursive yet, so this is probably in the dead ends, wrote in cursive, the explorer found a home, but he still looks to the stars when he's lost.
Okay, so my theory is that Jacob is an adult, but he's lived in the 1800s because they only write in cursive and he's come back. But somehow they weren't home or they weren't there or he couldn't connect with them. And so he left that as like an Easter egg to tell them he's
Oh.
okay.
Oh.
And that's how he was communicating with them. So my thing
That
is
is
he's been
so
trying to
bizarre.
get to them the whole time, but somehow he can't.
Because the pawn doesn't take you where you want to go, only where you need
Where
to
you
go.
need to
I
go.
didn't realize, I never, I'm, this is why we're doing this, because I never realized, oh, that's adult Jacob sending her a note. That is so crazy. I don't even know what to do with that.
Either that or it's
Anyway.
Either that or it's Colton.
Oh, true, true. But she
So
remembers Jacob saying it.
but maybe
That
Colton would
flashback
say it to him.
from,
Like,
yep, this is true. There's so much here. I cannot wait. I could not have gotten through this review. Like, I'm so glad we timed it this way.
yeah,
I would have you're just so disappointed
that
at the
there's,
cliffhanger
yeah,
and how long you have to wait.
yeah,
I don't know if we have that recorded. Did we did a watch party for that last one, right? I
yeah.
think
But
we
we weren't.
zoomed because we
We
couldn't get it to
couldn't
work.
get the yeah, we couldn't get it to work
I
because
can't remember if we
Canada
actually
and the
recorded it.
U.S. watch parties do not work, even with VPNs. We tried literally everything.
Yep.
But it was honestly, I'm just so excited to see what happens, and I want to see Jacob. And I
Yeah,
bet
I
you
can't believe.
he's an
Yeah.
adult. I am like, I don't know why, but I bet he's like older.
Well, and the thing is, Elle and Kat have broken up, but he's clearly in the next season. Like, I'm just so curious how that plays out. And it
Mm,
seems like a lot of the next season is in the 1800s.
yes.
I think it's going to be
But
really
so
interesting.
then will Kat take over the newspaper? Because she's
Right?
going to be so busy. Yeah.
It's just,
There's
there's
so
so much.
much.
Well, do we have any final thoughts or favorite quotes here?
The
I have
time
one.
traveler has found a home. Okay, go ahead.
The one quote that Dell shares from Colton, and she's telling Alice, you got to do the things that scare you.
Yeah,
I
that's
was
so
like,
good.
yes, such a good quote. So be kind to yourself. I think in recovery, it's just like there's this titration of like you have like one foot in safety so that your body feels safe enough to move forward, but then the other foot in like discomfort so that you're still moving forward and you have to titrate between the two to recover. So anyway, thanks for joining us for season 1. I can't believe we got through all of season 1. We hope that many more will join us for season 2. I really think this show is going to have a cult following. Like,
oh yes,
right?
it's
Don't
so
you
good.
think? It's so good. So please join us. Season 2 is going to be so much fun because the way we see it is going to be like a whole different ball game because we're watching it live in a real time.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going to happen. Join us for our crazy, as you can see, with 2 HSPs that are very different and with wild imaginations. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
So true.
So that's it. We'll see you next week.
Thanks. Bye.